The next poet I'd like to invite onto the stage is Joanne Burns. Joanne Burns' poetry includes numerous prose poems, short fictions and monologues. Her first book of poetry, Snatch, was published in London in 1972. Since then, Joanne has published over a dozen other collections, including On a Clear Day, Aerial Photography, Footnotes of a Hammock, and in 2007, an illustrated history of diaries. Her new collection, Amphora, is forthcoming from Giramondo Publishing this year. Joanne has worked closely with the Red Room on a lot of reasons. One sort of more private role is I often go to Joanne for a lot of advice about various Red Room things, especially the sort of pesky nature of writers' festivals and people's personalities, which could be called a form of gossip, but it's more very enjoyable speaking to someone who's worked within the poetry world for a very long time and has a dispassionate, perhaps, and thoughtful view on how poetry works in different spaces. Joanne first was involved in the Red Room in a very early project we did called Fingerprints, which was quite basic. We had a big, long clothesline, I think. Was it fingerprint? No, pegged poetry. It was a big, long clothesline, and people wrote poems on different materials, and they were pegged to a string. And it was when the Red Room first started. It was just in a little weird open space at the UTS Gallery, and all the poems were hanging there. And Jill Jones, who's also going to read tonight, put pillows on there, and then the entire clothesline fell down in front of everyone. Embarrassing. Joanne's also worked on our education program as well and starred in a series of videos we made called The Word Shed, where she read some poems set in someone's kitchen somewhere on earth. I'd like to welcome Joanne Burns.
Right. My poem, or rather poem extract, included in the Poems to Share Cards project, comes from a longer poem called Sand. This was a poem I wrote during my participation in the Red Room's Paper Cuts Cabinet of Lost and Found project at Abbottsley School with Year 9 students in 2007. The girls were to write poems centred around objects which had some personal significance to them, and at the first session some of them brought dolls or soft toy creatures. So in response, I wrote a doll poem. This extract focuses on the worry doll, a more adult type of doll, I think. Like a large almond, the miniature box of worry dolls, each smaller than a match, sits there on a bookshelf fading in the sunlight, like all my good intentions down the multiplying years. These dolls stay pristine, bright inside like cocktail onions. I do all the worrying, bleached of any colour, while individually unnamed, they bide their time. And the second one I'm going to read tonight is a recently written one called Cheap. It's a list poem, an auto-fiction, which had its origin in a Googling of my name to see what all those other Joanne Burnses were up to. It's a bit scary, really, disorienting. I didn't delve into their details. Rather, I quickly glanced at the Google listings, plucked out an image or word here and there, and then improvised and invented, grazing about in surreal or more absurd territory. It was an amusingly dislocating process, a cheap rebirth. Cheap. Twisting in polyethylene spheralities, I interact with galaxy clusters. I was a freelance bride last week. I remember how I had been a cowgirl when I nourished a family root. I became an organic present, like a true workshop leader. I have worn website shoes to work. I found my hands in the prairie show. I have more dignity than clothes. I have thought about poetry as hypertension as I write these recipes for first aid and scholarship. I am easy to sing. Could I moonlight as a subcommittee? It's all vaudeville. And finally, just something very short with a short poem called Porque, which comes from a series called Gnome, and there's no backstory to this little piece. Porque. Why does there have to be an explanation for everything, scientific toga? I know it because I knew it. Easy as walking a gelato. Thank you.